So the action was to get a whole table full of domestic objects from the market, and the sign said, please place an object, stack an object on my hand, something like that. And so people piled up the objects, and I tried to hold them without letting them fall. So I was really the earthquake in this case. And that's pretty late in the day. So, and people began to pick out of the rubble the things that hadn't broken, and they talked about the connection with their experience after the earthquake, trying to retrieve what survived. I discovered that next door on the sort of a hillside overlooking the museum was an amusement park with the tallest free fall ride supposedly in Europe, called Atmosphere, F-E-A-R. So when they were in operation, you would hear people screaming every 5 minutes. So I chose to be in the courtyard of the museum for the evening while other performances were happening inside, and I had this load of ice cream in my arms, and every time the ride fell, and you'd see, there it is, and you'd see little feet dangling, and then you'd hear screaming for about, I don't know, not very long, a couple seconds. So I just screamed all night with them. And the ice cream just kept melting down the front of me. The first marking time that I did in 2012, this is a room, a gallery, and covering the floor is wheat flour. And I spent 8 hours walking out the door of the room. So I brought the chairs with me for quite a while, and it made a kind of drawing in the flour. What you can't really tell here is that this was in Utah, and it had snowed that day, so the entire landscape looked like this. But this had been a garage, and there was that one end was a garage door, so there was this cold air. And yeah, the door. So that was 8 hours long. I was in Girona, Spain, and we were in a festival that was in what is now an art center, but had formerly been a church. So I actually used the room, the tower room that was that window. And during the day, when I came into the room, what this is actually lights from underneath. So this is clear plastic, or translucent plastic. And the lighting from the room comes from that and from the window, but no other place. I knew I was in the evening, and I was really interested in the fact that the source of light was in the floor. So I promptly covered it up with dirt. And I used wrist lights for the performance. So you can see the lights attached right under, like the bicycle lights. I had them on my wrist. This was one where I wanted to work with changing the action based on the bells in the church. And so in a way this could also be considered one of the marking time pieces. But as I started to work I realized there were like about 6 churches in the vicinity, and they were all on different times. So the bells were ringing constantly. So I had this pile of oranges, which at some point I shared with the audience. So you can see that the light of the city came in to the room a little bit. This also was extremely slow performance, meditative, a similar slowness as to my one yesterday. But at a certain point, I did begin to uncover the light that was in the floor, coming through the floor. So if I brushed the dirt aside, the light would come up and shine on my face. This was a 7-hour performance. That's Jamie McMurray standing there. A really interesting space in Boston that's circular and huge. So I performed the full 7 hours of the event, and then other people performed shorter pieces, like hour-long pieces, around the perimeter of the space. So it was like a big clock. They moved, one after another, but I continued in the middle. So this is a small table, very similar to the one that who used? Hugh used, will use, is using. That, an arm length. So all I did was, this is halfway through the evening, I pushed those 2 glasses of water across the table and over the edge, but I took the entire 7 hours to do it. So I had the ticking clock and the chime, similar to the one I used yesterday. And people could come and go. They'd go see the other performances. They'd come back and see the progress of the 2 glasses of water. And even if they saw it like that, there were people who missed the fall. That's afterwards. So that action lasted the entire length of the event. So there was one thing after 11 that closed the evening. A good example of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston deciding that it was time to include performance. They asked a small group of artists to make actions that art in odd spaces, I think they called it. So they wanted us to use the museum in different ways. So I said that I wanted to be in the only room in the museum that had other human bodies in it, which is the Egyptian mummy room. And I spent 6.5 hours, and that's where I am. So there were many people that, there you can see my feet. I like this picture. My feet, the mummy's feet. Not an easy one to photograph, I might add. So there were many people who never noticed me, and others who, a little 2-year-old that immediately came right to me because I was at her level. I did have a student invigilator who was prepared to deal with anyone who became distressed. And so I started at noon. The actual event started at 4. So after 4 o'clock, people started to congregate in the room and pointed out to anyone new who came in. like, she's under there. But were actually very respectful and silent and just sat with me. There was a kind of, this one is the Egyptian mummy room is really eerie, actually. And when you look at the bodies, and there are other bodies in here that are more unwrapped, so you see the form a lot more clearly. There is always that question about how dead are they? Or what does it really mean to have the body there still? So to have me be a wrapped body meant either I was dead or the mummies were still alive. We were maybe in different stages of the same state.
So you were wrapped as well?
Yeah, I was. I had my face covered too. So really only my feet showed. The other thing I had was the fragrance of jasmine in the room, which was distinctively a difference to the space. And jasmine has this, similar to lilies, has that, that cycle that you can go through where it smells really lovely and then it smells like rotting flesh and comes back around to lovely. They actually identify that as animalic. So it had that, like people would like, oh, that's really great, and then I want to throw up. I include this because it was in Dublin, and I thought it'd be fun to show something closer. I set up a table with rocks on it, and we were silent, and different people sat down and we did whatever evolved between the four people with the rocks. Sometimes it was a kind of game, sometimes there was a kind of poetry that occurred. Sometimes there were exchanges. Sometimes it was very sculptural. This is in Sokolowsko, Poland, in a town that had been a tuberculosis, had a lot of tuberculosis sanatoriums because it was in the mountains. Most of them closed. There was still one hospital in operation. So when the 19th century version of curing tuberculosis was good food and fresh air and rest. And so I set up a bed outside to catch the breeze. I asked people to talk to me about the future. So I had a lot of different types of conversation. Festival in the United States right outside of Boston, an abandoned quarry. I spent the day adrift. I learned later that in the 60s they thought a woman's body had been disposed of in this quarry, and they drained it and pulled out 75 automobiles that had been dumped. They did name, she was not in it. But.
Did you float for the day? How did you float?
If the water was really cold. And I'll stop there. 5 minutes for questions.
How would you describe your approach or relationship to aesthetics?
I'm a minimalist. That's about it. And I'm getting more and more minimal. I like to say my work is getting more and more plain. And someone suggested I should say that my work is becoming more austere. A more elegant word for plain.
And this is going back to the question of time and length. I was just wondering, because you were saying performing arts performance arts as a way of relating audience and performer at the same time. Why the choice of time? Because obviously the state of consciousness that the performer has is completely different than the audience that may stay maybe 10 minutes, half an hour. So how is that experience connected? Why the choice of time?
Well, we can't escape it. Often in these durational works, I'm in the context of a festival where the audience can go see other work and then come back. So they can detect some effect of time often without having to stay there the full time. So they come and go, which is fine. Does that answer it?
Well, in a way, but also wanted to know what is that tells you your intuition about what's the length of time that you want for a certain performance.
Well, the Yesterdays and that series is called Marking Time, and so, with the organizer, determine how long I will be performing, and then I am there. I have a clock that chimes on the hour, and I continue until my time is up. Which is different than doing an action that has its own way of unfolding in time. Like if you use up a material. And actually in this one, what the amount of time was, I couldn't do it till sunset because my body determined the amount of time as I got colder and colder. I couldn't keep, I couldn't retain body heat because of the temperature of the water.
When you were performing yesterday, in that, although it's quite an enclosed space, but you're very exposed because it was visible from three sides. And I didn't feel that I wanted to come into that space, but there were people in there with you, very close to you. How did that feel? Because it seemed a very intimate piece of work, and I just wondered how you felt having those people there and moving around you.
I was happy to have company. I thought of the space of the work to extend beyond the windows, so I was seeing people on the street also. I don't not see them. They're part of it.
Yeah.
Well, you can only make work about what it is you're paying attention to at the moment that you're paying attention. Sometimes my focus is really outward to, politics or, what my stupid country's government is doing. But other times, I'm grappling with something that's very private and personal. And so, I before I decide to do a piece, or when I'm expected to do one, sometimes even, I do have to think about where I am and what I need to think about. I use performance as a way to think about the world and about my life, and it talks back to me about what I am thinking. I mean, I'm not always so conscious about what's going on, and I try to just follow an impulse, or choose a material because that's the one that seems like the material to choose without analyzing it. And it isn't until afterwards that I might say, oh, now I understand why I chose that this time and not last time. And so I do a lot of writing before and afterwards as well, as a way to look at what a work might mean? And I'm also really interested in how a viewer uses the work in terms of their own life or their thinking. I mean, I'm not always, it's not apparent. I'm not trying to like tell you to think one way. There's an image, and how you use it is equally important and perhaps more important than how I'm using it.